So this is a strange language. You take from your masters, you take from your slaves, you take from your coolies, and you take from your gurus. Hello and welcome back to Nibblepop. This is Monami Mukherjee and I am making this video because of multiple requests from many of my subscribers and viewers. But I would like to mention Anonna Nanda as a person who continuously pestered me for this one video, and she also wanted me to write a note or a write-up on the Greek influence on English language. I really thank you, Anonna, for being so persistent. I couldn't ignore your messages anymore, and I thought that this would really enrich the playlist of Philology that we have already prepared for you. Many of you have already watched those videos, especially the videos on French influence, Latin influence, Scandinavian influence on English language. And if you haven't done so yet, I would like you to go and check them after you watch this video. So without taking up any more of your time, let's start the class today. What does Greece mean to us? What does Greece mean to English people? You see, Greece is not just one country. Its size is not even a big one. So why is it so vital for us to understand how Greece influenced other countries, or how the Greek language influenced a language like English? As I was telling you, Greece is not just a country. Greece is like a symbol. It's a symbol of that height of culture that human civilization could aspire to during its earliest days of evolution, you can say. It holds the same value in the European world as Sanskrit holds in countries like India. Greek and Latin, these languages are known as the classical languages. Okay, so they have that element of erudition, that element of sophistication, and therefore the influence of the language Greek is seen in making English language more erudite, more cultured, and more sophisticated. All right. First, we will try to look at the different stages in which the Greek language entered the arena of English language. All right. It's a chronological timeline we will try to look at. Then we will see how the vocabulary changes were made and how finally the mythology, the stories, the fables, they shaped the way in which English people express themselves in speech, in writing, in thinking. All right. And while doing this, we will try to figure out why this influence was happening and in which spheres of knowledge this influence was most prominent. All right. So first, let us look at the timeline of Greek influence. As we all know that the major influences which we have already studied are the French influence, the Latin influence, and the Scandinavian influence. So these three are the three pillars, you can say, of influences if you are a student of philology in English. Greek language did not directly affect the English language the way French did or Scandinavian did. Why? Because unlike French people or Scandinavian people, there was no direct human contact between the Greeks and the English people, other than maybe some people coming up to England as a tourist. So the problem here is Greece was not interacting with England on the same ways in which French people were doing, or other countries which were having economic exchanges, trade routes, etc. with England. Greece was more like a language which entered into mainstream English through Latinized versions. All right. So while the Latin influence was taking place in England, Greek words started getting inside the vocabulary of England in a filtered form. So this is the primary way in which Greek language started influencing English language. Alright, so it was not a direct influence like the other influences, but it was more like you can say a filtered influence, filtered through Latin. Alright, the first influence of Greek language may be seen during the close of the Middle Ages. Just when the world was turning towards that moment of Renaissance, during the fag end of the Middle Ages, the age of Chaucer that is, then we see some words of Greek language entering into the vocabulary of English. Let's look at the examples here. Bible of course is very relevant here because Middle Ages was a time when Christianity was gaining its control over the whole of England. All right, therefore words pertaining to Christianity, as we have also seen in case of Latin influence, they were taken wholly from French, Latin, and in this case Greek. All right, so let's look at some other words here. Harmony, ecstasy, all these words are related to, of course, religion and the world of spirituality. And interestingly, we have words like atom. See, atom here belongs to the world of science. So this is the beauty of Greek influence. On one hand, it was giving you words in which you express religious ideas, and on the other hand, it's supplying you with words where you can express scientific ideas. No wonder Greece was the seat of democracy, and it's so beautifully balanced. You have all kinds of knowledge, as if Greece was giving English people the utterance of dualities, religion on one hand, science on the other. And let's look at some other words during this period. Harmony. Okay, harmony, tragedy, theater, of course, because see, those were the times when people were getting more and more acquainted with Aristotle's theories, right? And while understanding those ideas of Greek theater, they had to take up those terms from Greek. Sometimes to ease pronunciation, to make pronunciation more comfortable or convenient for English people, there were some distortions made to the words, but they were taken up from Greece, all right, or Greek language. But these words did not belong to any complex scientific idea or things where they had to pursue some deep study of any metaphysical idea. These words were, yes, they belong to these diverse fields of religion, of science, of entertainment and theater, but they were mostly terms associated with some kind of Greek experience. When people started to have the taste of classical way of thinking or living, when they wanted to be more sophisticated, mostly rich people belonging to the higher economic belt, they wanted to have a taste of the classical life. They would go to a theater, they would study, mythologies, and even in case of performances related to drama, we know how religion dominated the stage during the Middle English period. If we are to talk about the miracles and mystery plays, all right, we have dealt in detail about this age in a very separate video, which many of you have already seen. So people were experiencing Greek way of life not as a regular part of their life, but as a separate way or a separate evening spent in entertainment. Therefore, words were taken up which did not belong to very complex fields of study, but more like superficial ones. It was during the 16th century that we first see that complexity was growing. Words belonging to greater complexity were being introduced. Another important thing that was happening in this period was that already people were getting acquainted with Latin expressions, because this was the time, you can say, the flowering of the Renaissance was happening. And the English tongue, it was not resisting so much to the ways in which classical words are pronounced. Already French words broke down that resistance to a lot extent. Then Latin words were already there, and therefore Greek pronunciation, which is very close to the way Latin words are pronounced, that had more access to English people's speaking, all right, or English people's vocabulary. And therefore, we have words which belong to more abstract areas instead of concrete ones. For example, was like dilemma, pathos, theory, irony, elegy. Now, see, as people were getting more and more acquainted with Greek literature, Greek drama especially, they were getting aware of the abstract qualities and not just the surface qualities like character and plot. They were getting more and more aware of the ways in which plot progresses and the word theory itself. The word theory itself is an abstract thing. It is against, you can say, practicals, where you apply things. Theory is something where you just think about things and you deduce and you come to a conclusion. That is theory. So these rising complexity was discernible during the 16th century. And then, of course, in the 17th century, you have John Milton, of course, and the whole idea of Reformation and then the Restoration, where we see that classical influence is seen in a very strong manner on the entire body of literature produced during the times. In fact, it was considered to be the mark of a superior writing if you use Greek vocabulary or you derive from Greek vocabulary. In Shakespeare's time, we had still some element of pedantic language, of the need to address common people through common language, although Shakespearean language might seem to us as complicated because of its diction, the way it is written. But during that time, during the time when Shakespeare wrote, that was the way people communicated. So it was not a complicated language. It was not like Milton wrote. When it came to Milton, he deliberately chose a difficult way of writing. And if you remember the first part of Paradise Lost, the invocation, there he says that I'm going to go beyond the Ionian Mount. Ionian Mount, Mount Olympus, that mountain in Greece. So this man was looking at Greece and he was thinking that I'm going to take from there, but I'm not going to be so influenced that I stay there. I will go beyond it. What is going beyond it? What does it mean? In philology or in linguistics, going beyond means you take something from a language and you adapt it to your own situation and you recreate. And that imagination of Milton, that ability of Milton to not just take things from Greece, but transform them into English words, that is the classic example we can have in case of 17th century influence. We have a lot of such refashioning and adaptation, and we have words like orchestra, pandemonium. Pandemonium is modeled after the word pantheon. Pantheon is a Greek word, and pandemonium is like a mirror image of that word, only meaning the opposite, the home of the demons. Dogma, clinic, hyphen. So see, the influence was not just related to literature. It was related to, again, science, theory, and then hyphen. It was related to the way English words were written. Greek influence as we also see in case of Latin, they influenced written English more than they influenced conversational English or spoken English. Why? Because in order to use a Greek word or any word derived from a Greek root, you had to think about that whole idea. It would take time for you to understand whether you can apply that word to your situation or not. Now, these things don't happen when we speak languages. Today, it is convenient to use Greek words or words belonging to Greek origin when we are speaking, even like in conversational English. But this is because these words have been taken up centuries back. And today, they might seem very natural in English conversations, but when they first appeared in the vocabulary of English, they were used primarily in written English, maybe in very elaborate essays and mostly prose writings, because poetry is more about spontaneity. It was back then. Therefore, we see a lot of impact in the areas where English people were writing things, all right? 18th and 19th centuries was more like a reaction against this kind of influences, especially the phase when we have the pre-romantics and eventually the romantics. The fascination for the classics was still there. Even in romantics, we have a lot of nostalgia, and then that grows during the period when Browning and Tennyson, they were writing. But this fascination was more about classical thoughts than classical words. Especially during the Romantic age, after the publication of lyrical ballads, people invariably wanted to focus more on the development of native tongue, the way common people spoke. Wordsworth was saying that poetry was something where man is speaking to another man. So it has to have an element of conversational diction, and therefore the tendency to borrow Latinized Greek or words belonging to Greek roots, that tendency was being toned down, but still Greece continued to have its influence, and this time the influence was very much on the way science was developing. This was also the time when we have the scientific revolution, followed by the time of Newton. And when you look at the end of the 19th century, it was an explosion of scientific thoughts. All right, so it was during this phase, words like philander, pylon, acrobat, agnostic, these words were coined and refashioned from Greek roots. Now, I want you to focus on this word pylon. This is a very special word. This doesn't belong to the world of theories. Pylon essentially means a gate tower, you can say, or a gateway. Now, this word was taken up, and it's like at present also, it's used in architecture, and it refers to any kind of tower that gives support. It might be some steel towers between which electrical wires are running, or or the piers of a bridge, the columns especially. So it belongs to the world of architecture, and it also belongs to a world of practical application of science. So you see how the influence of Greek language was not just on the levels of theory, but also on the levels of application, especially because at the end of 18th, 19th centuries, we have that tendency of English people to focus on application of science. So these words help us understand in which that was carried out. So this chronological list, this gives us this feeling that linguistic influence is not just a superficial enrichment of the vocabulary or even expressions. It's like a map. It's like a map of a socio-cultural transformation of the culture in which the influence is taking place, the host language, I must say. With every turn of the century, people of England, they were getting more in tune with the ways in which classical people thought, the classical civilization worked. It took England a lot of time to understand the concept of democracy. And not before the fall of Charles I do we have any kind of autonomy given to people's rule. Therefore, historical events which involved any kind of paradigm shift or change in mentality, that was more related to the ways in which classical languages were influencing people. No one can say for sure what came first, the words from Greece or the ideas which got expressed through the words from Greece. Language is so beautifully connected with the ways people think. And that is why, perhaps that is why, human beings are capable of far more complex thoughts than any other species in the world, because we have what the animals do not have. We have words and complicated ways in which they interact with each other. So this whole timeline of Greek influence gives us this idea that England grew, developed, matured from that initial flat borrowings of Latinized Greek words into something where they were handling Greek roots and recreating words, refashioning them, sometimes even not understanding the real meanings of Greek roots. Doesn't matter. They were confident to handle these Greek roots and recreate their own English words. They were showing their creativity even in these linguistic transformations. So when it comes to English vocabulary now, words were either taken directly or indirectly from Greek roots. The two processes through which this was happening, one was by forming hybrids. In hybrids, you have more than one part in a word, and those two parts or three parts, they belong to different origins. So you are putting together two different kinds of words and you're forming a new word, that is hybrid. Or you can have through derivation. So hybridization and derivation, these were the two tools in the hand of English people to absorb Greek influence. All right. What is derivation? Derivation is there's a word and you just add things to it. It is also a kind of hybridization because the thing which you are adding to it, that might belong to a different language. But in derivation, you have a main root word where you are adding a suffix or a prefix to it, which is you are adding affixes to a root word, and that is called derivation. In hybrids, you have two or more distinct parts which may or may not serve as prefixes or suffixes to each other. They might be two separate words which come together to form a new word, that is a hybrid. So in this way, hybrids are different from derivations. For example, Greek prefix with English words were seen in words like anti-British. And then you have hypersensitive. Now, hyper is a Greek prefix. Greeks used to use this word hyper, and English people, they added an English word to it, sensitive, and it became hypersensitive. Look at the word amoral or immoral. Using a as a negativizer, putting a and using it as non. Amoral means non-moral, not related to morality, that is amoral. That is also a way in which you are using a Greek prefix to a non-Greek word. All right. We have multiple usages of Greek fragments such as thermo, photo, pyro, right? And you have very large-scale use of suffixes like ology, nomi, and these were used to form new words like geology, thermometer, and sometimes the words will begin with ph, with the pronunciation pa. They also belong to Greek roots. Many of them, such as photo, philosophy, phrase, physical, philanthropy. The pronunciation of pa is not very English, it is very feminine. Therefore, English people originally did not have any fur. They had maybe father, where you put your teeth on your lower lips. But this is pa, where you are just using the two lips. That is the way in which French people spoke, the Greeks spoke, because it's a very soft way of pronunciation that did not belong to the Germanic way of talking. People speaking Bengali language would understand this. Bengali language is a feminine language. We have this pa in a lot of words. All right? Anyway, so when we look at these borrowings, as I was telling you, we can understand that areas in which Greek language influenced English, they were mostly philosophy, metaphysics, medicine, technology, and very interestingly, even grammar and rhetoric. Both these words, grammar, rhetoric, these two words are again derived from Greek. Greek language almost fully developed any kind of philosophical expressions. Sometimes it happened that they took a Greek word which belonged exclusively to the world of philosophy, and then English people started using it in such a common way that it eventually turned into something which is used in a very general sense. Take for example the word phenomenon or phenomenal. The word phenomenon, it is again taken from Greek. In Greek, it is something like phenomenon, or I cannot pronounce that, but it's taken from Greek, where it means that which appears. Now, Latin suffix al is added, so it is Latinized first, and we started using phenomenal. Phenomenal was initially used only as a philosophical term or term used in philosophical discussions. Phenomenal world means the world as it appears in front of your eyes. Alright, which is related to the word phenomenon, happening, real. Now, today, this word is used by almost everybody to mean something completely different. News anchors, they keep on saying it's a phenomenal event, as if phenomenon or phenomenal means spectacular. It is not spectacular. Phenomenal means something which is normally happening, but now it is used to mean something which is extraordinary. So this is how words keep changing, evolving. Greek influence is also observed, as I was telling you, in natural sciences, medical science, coining technical terms, new terms, and even modern coinages, neurology, psychology, they are all derived from the words which belong to the Greek vocabulary. And this was happening even before. If you take examples such as hepatic, related to liver, or phlebotomy, all these words are derived from Greek origins. Now, this tendency to use Greek roots or Greek sounding words to new innovations, this has become so widespread that nowadays people use it even without knowing what the original Greek root meant. It should sound Greek and you apply it to your innovation. For example, phonograph, telephone. When people were coining these words, they were not aware of the roots of Greek language, not mostly. So why were they doing this? They were doing this because they knew that Greeks represent the best of cultures. And therefore, if we apply something Greek to something, it adds sophistication. And their language was the epitome of perfection in the eyes of English people, especially in around the time of Renaissance and the Enlightenment. And people were so influenced by this idea of classical sophistication that they started using names of Greek heroes and characters and use Greek mythologies to create whole sets of proverbs and allusions in their writings. Expressions like Pandora's box, Achilles' heels, and Herculean task, and many such expressions were getting a part of English conversation even. So what is it? A great help to English language? Sometimes we feel that when one language influences another language, it's helping. But with every help, there comes a price. English language was developing under these influences, especially classical influences. But this development stunted the growth of native resources. It's like English people were very lazy and they got a ready-made word and just took it. They did not think about evolving their own word, their own expression. Now, primarily this happened because they were not the innovators in the first place. The Greeks were innovators. We don't have this problem in the Indian subcontinent because the ancient classical culture in India, that was a seat of innovation too. I'm not saying we had aeroplanes back then. I'm saying compared to other cultures during the time, India had reached a mighty level of innovation, especially in abstract sciences and theories. So we don't have any problem there. We have already set of words which we can use to develop our scientific innovation now. But this didn't happen in case of English people. They didn't have that kind of cultural history to back them up when they were coming up with innovations. So they had to look at some other culture, some other religion, some other language. And interestingly, Greece was very much handy because they were already getting used to Latin and French. So you can say Greek offered a lazy way out and an easy way out, which the English people took up. And then when they were overusing it, there were multiple problems there. First problem, they started to overuse and make their own writing very verbose and elaborate and unnecessarily complicated, especially using bombastic words which common people did not understand. This led to something which we can say a Johnsonese way of writing. This is also a part of the ill effects of Latin influence, you can say. Because it's difficult to separate the two influences. They were happening together, sometimes fused into each other. So you can say the ill effects of Greek influence were also the ill effects of Latin influence because they were happening simultaneously. So Johnsonese was, you can say, a tendency which we see in Dr. Samuel Johnson, although he grew out of it when he matured later on. Initially, we see that his over-stylized words and expressions were because of his idea that classical roots enrich your writing. And that's why we have Johnsonese. Now, Dr. Johnson, he was at least using the words in the correct manner. There were people who started using Greek sounding words in inappropriate way, and that led to which we now know as malapropism. It's based on the character of Mrs. Malaprop, and she's a funny character who used to inappropriately use heavy sounding words to sound that she's very serious and cultured, but led to a disaster. So either you have euphuism, even that word is derived from Greek, I'm sorry. Either you have euphuism or you have inappropriate usage of language. In any case, it tied the smooth movement or natural evolution of English language. But then that is the nature of English language. It has such hunger that it vociferously feeds on anything. English language is always under a feeding frenzy, and this is evident in the way influences are still going on. Now they take up words from any place they can. From the colonies, they have ruled over. So, this is a strange language. You take from your masters, you take from your slaves, you take from your coolies, and you take from your gurus. So, that is English language for you. We have completed Greek influence. Congratulations. I have already made a write-up for this. The link will be there in the description box. There will be some I button also floating around where you can simply click and go to my website to get this whole note. Don't memorize blindly. Try to understand why and how the Greek language influenced English language. And if you think that this class was useful in any way, please, your comments would really encourage us. You can also give me some more suggestions on which topics I should make videos on, especially under this portion of philology. But before that, do check out the videos which I have already made. So thank you for being with me. See you very soon in my next video. Probably going to be a series again. So till then, keep studying, stay safe, stay happy. This is Monami Mukherjee signing off.